This morning we're still in Mark's Gospel, and we've skipped ahead again to Mark chapter 14. We've skipped ahead again. We heard in that worship in the Word reading the short, brief account that Mark gives us of Christ's triumphal entry. And if you go back and you look in just the chapter before, Jesus had just warned his disciples one more time of what was coming. He told them that he would be handed over, that he would be betrayed, that he would be killed, and that on the third day he would rise again. So he's told his disciples this 3 times, and they still are confused as to about what is about to happen. They still, they're waving palm branches. They're saying, "Blessed is the King of Israel. Blessed is the one who has come to sit on David's throne." They still think that they have a Messiah who will come and do what? Kick out the Romans. Sit on David's throne. Cleanse the temple worship so that things can once again be the right way in Israel. They think Jesus has come to bring all of those things about with some kind of political revolution. I like Luke's account of that of that trip into Jerusalem, because in it Luke includes that Jesus stopped and overlooked Jerusalem, and while everyone else is Hosanna, 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 Christ is weeping. Christ is weeping, and he says, "If you would have only known what would bring you peace." But they wanted none of it. They didn't want what Jesus really had to offer. They wanted somebody to come and set them free from the Romans. They wanted somebody to come and reestablish the true line of David on the throne. They really wanted somebody to come and out those power-hungry high priests and restore Israel. And that was not why Jesus came. Was not why he came. That was not his purpose. His purpose was not to just redeem those few square miles. His purpose was not only to set the people who had descended from Abraham free. He came to invite all of us to step into freedom. He came to invite every person from every nation and tribe and tongue to step into freedom, to walk in freedom, to walk in the reign of God. So we're picking up the story after some things have happened. Okay? So he comes in, he's riding on the colt, he goes to the temple, he goes back to Bethany, he's anointed at Bethany, he gives some teachings. He talks about the greatest commandment, which we know, you ought to know by now. I feel like I say it about every other week, right? The greatest commandment is to what? Love God and love others, right? Love God and love others as yourself. And he points to that widow who puts her coins in the temple offering. He says she gave more than everybody else. All of this has happened since the last time we opened up Mark. And now they've had the Last Supper, where again, he's told his disciples, he's warned them, he said, "I'm about to be betrayed. It's about to happen." And they're like, "Who's going to betray you, Jesus?" And he says, "The one who's putting their bread in the dish with me." Now, sometimes we go, "Oh, it must have been Judas." Everybody was using that dish. Everybody in that room was using that dish. And we will see that before the night is over, every one of them will have left him alone. Every one of them will have turned tail and run. Every one of them will have abandoned him to be crucified. So that's where we're picking up the story in Mark 14, verse 27. Verse 26 says that they went out to the Mount of Olives. So that's where this conversation is taking place. So starting in verse 27, Jesus says, "You will all fall away." Jesus told them, "For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." "I tell you the truth," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times." But Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the others said the same. I want you to pay attention to that there. All the others said the same. So Peter was the loudmouth speaking up first, but everybody said the same thing. "We will go with you. We will die with you. We are with you to the end." They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "Daddy, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And he returned to his disciples, and he found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Once more he went away and he prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Am I leading a rebellion," Jesus said, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled." So then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. And let's skip down to verse 66. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. "You also were with that Nazarene Jesus," she said. But he denied it. "I don't know or understand what you're talking about," he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, "Hey, this fellow is one of them." Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." He began to call down curses on himself, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man you are talking about." Immediately the rooster crowed the second time, and Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and he wept. So we have these different scenes. We've got Jesus with his disciples, and they are going up on the Mount of Olives. They're going to this place called Gethsemane. And Jesus tells them again on the way there, you will all fall away. You will all fall away. And they all swear up and down. If they would have had a stack of Bibles, they would have swore on that stack of Bibles, I will not, I will never, I will always stay with you, Jesus. I will never leave you. Let them string me up beside you, Jesus. I'm never going to turn my back. But Jesus knew. This wasn't a loyalty test, okay? This was not Jesus saying to them, how much do you love me? This was Jesus telling them straight up, telling them the truth. Telling them the truth. You're not as strong as you think you are. We've watched these disciples. We've watched them, right? We've watched them try to do things they couldn't do in their own strength because they wouldn't rely on God. Couldn't drive out that demon. Why? Because it needed some prayer. They hadn't even prayed about it. We've seen them argue, so convinced that they knew what Jesus' plans were. Argue about who was going to take the top spots in his new kingdom. We skipped over the specific story about the 2 brothers who said, hey, Jesus, can one of us sit on your right and the other sit on your left? Oh my goodness. Jesus knows them. Jesus knows them. They have sat together, slept around the same campfire, eaten their meals together, walked on the same roads for the last 3 years. Jesus knows them. And he knows what is about to happen. And he knows that they will not stand with him. He knows that. And I don't think Jesus is throwing a big man fit here. I don't think he's like, well, I'm going to be betrayed and nobody's going to come with me. This is not about manipulation. This is about letting them know that he already knows what's coming. If we read John's gospel, we know that Jesus has also just washed their feet as an act of service and love, and told every one of them, you belong to me. You belong to me. And yet, as they are going up to Gethsemane, he tells them, you will all fall away. You will all fall away. And I wonder at the grace of that. At the grace that Jesus, knowing they would betray him, washed their feet. That Jesus, knowing that he had just washed their feet, he could tell them some hard truth. Who do we listen to when it comes to hard truth? We listen to the ones who love us and know us. We listen to the ones to whom we belong. And Jesus is saying to them, you need to listen. You need to hear me. This is going to be a hard night, and you're not going to do the things you thought you would. You're not as strong as you think you are. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is so weak. So weak. They go to Gethsemane, and Jesus says to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He takes those 3 disciples, those ornery ones that he's always got to keep, sit close to the teacher's desk. Keep his arm around him. Takes them with him. And he says, keep watch for me. He tells them, my soul is overwhelmed to the point of death. I need you to keep watch for me. And these disciples who had just sworn up and down, I will never leave you. I will always be faithful. I will always be true, Jesus. Jesus is laying on his face, crying out, Daddy, Abba, Father. And he comes back. And this scene is just a roller coaster for me. You couldn't tell that, right? On one hand, you've got Jesus who is crying out, sweating drops of blood, crying out in anguish for his soul, and he comes back, and those disciples who said, I will never betray you, I will do anything for you, Jesus. I will die with you, Jesus. Are you asleep? Really? 1 hour. You couldn't just sit here with me for 1 hour. Just 1 hour and pray. You're asleep. He says, watch and pray so that you don't fall into temptation. He goes again and he prays the same prayer to his Father. Please, if there's any other way that we can do this, if there's any other way that we can take the devil down, I'm on board. But not my will, yours. And he comes back, and again, they're sleepy. They're asleep on the rocks. Have you ever slept on a rock? That is not an easy thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do. That's my Boy Scout up here telling us, you're right, it's not an easy thing to do to fall asleep on a rock. And yet, Mark says, but come on, guys, give them a break. They just had a big dinner, right? They just had a big dinner. In there, we know there was at least 1 cup of wine, probably a bottle, but at least 1 cup of wine. And they are sleepy. Their eyes are heavy. Mark says, come on, remember, their eyes are heavy. Give them a break. Jesus goes again to pray and comes back again. They are asleep. And he says, it's enough. It's enough. It's enough. Get up. Here comes my betrayer. And here comes Judas. Judas, who Mark reminds us once again was one of the 12. Not just a disciple, not just a random follower, not just a groupie. This is someone on the inner circle. Judas, who was one of the 12, appeared. He came with a crowd, a mob, armed with swords and clubs, and he said beforehand, you'll know who you need to pick up because I'm going to kiss him. I want to know who among this crowd would not have known who Jesus was. All of them would have known who Jesus was. They knew who they were going to get. This is not some anonymous person that they had never heard of before. These are guards from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. These are guys who would have been in the temple when Jesus was teaching. They would have been there when he cleared the temple. You think you're going to forget that? It was just a few days before this. They're not going to soon forget who Jesus is. And I don't know why Judas decided to betray him with a kiss. I don't know why. Sometimes I wonder if Judas needed to say goodbye. Sometimes I wonder if he wanted to betray Jesus, but he also didn't want to betray Jesus, because who among us is pure evil? Right? Who among us is pure evil? He and Jesus had had some good times together. He was going to do this thing, and he betrayed him with a kiss. Jesus confronts these men, confronts his own disciples even. Mark doesn't tell us who it is who drew his sword, but another gospel writer says it was Peter. And that gospel writer also tells us that Jesus then healed the servant's ear. Put it back on for him. Here you go. All better. And Jesus says, once and for all, I am not leading a rebellion. And at that point, all of it comes clear. And the disciples run away. Suddenly they realize that Jesus is not going to kick out the Romans. Suddenly they realize Jesus is not going to sit on his father David's throne. Suddenly they realize this is not what they thought it was. Because let me tell you, if Jesus had come to start a rebellion, they had seen the power that he possessed, and they knew that with a word he could have flattened the city. And when Jesus goes with them without a fight, without so much as saying, no, I won't go with you, when he goes with them willingly, they suddenly realize how wrong they were about this Messiah. And in their confusion and in their grief and in their disappointment, they run away. Which is just a devastating moment. And then Mark tells us, so see, here we go, back up on the roller coaster. Mark tells us that there's this young man who's just wearing a linen garment and he runs away naked. A lot of people feel like this is Mark himself, and this is Mark writing himself into his own story. Because why else would you put that in there? I mean, it doesn't really fit, does it? Here's this devastating moment. Everybody flees. Jesus is arrested. And we are crushed. And then Mark goes, and there was this one guy, and he was naked. Come on, Mark. This is supposed to be serious. Jesus is arrested, and he's taken before the Sanhedrin. And Peter follows him. Okay? He runs away, but then he thinks better of it, and he follows behind at a discreet distance so nobody can see him. And I wonder how he did that. I don't know what's going on. I think I have a short in my wire. I wonder how Peter knew how to creep along behind this crowd. Because, they hadn't invented spy movies yet. We all know, right? Oh. Pretend to be doing something else when they turn around to look, follow for a while, and then turn down a street, and then come back the other street. So I wonder how Peter knew how to follow from a distance without getting caught. But he does, and he gets there, and he's hearing this trial, and he's where he needs to be in order to be close enough to know what's going on, but far enough away to not risk his own neck. Oh, Peter. And Peter, who had said, Jesus, I will die with you. Jesus, I will die with you, is overhearing Jesus being condemned. And when a young girl says, oh, hey, you were with them, right? He says, what? I don't, what? What are you talking about? I don't know. Who? Jesus? I've got a cousin named Jesus. But no, I don't know this. Nope, sorry, wrong guy. And she goes about her business, and she comes back by, and she goes, no. She leans over to another person this time, and she goes, I really think he was with them. I think I saw him with Jesus in the temple. And again, he denied it. And after a little while, she's moved on. Okay, she had a job to do. Those people that she had said that to start looking at him real close. And maybe they've had a conversation with him, and maybe they've heard his accent. And they say, surely you are one of them. You're a Galilean, right? Now, I don't know how they knew. Maybe, like I said, it was his accent. Maybe it was his clothing. Maybe it was something about him, the way he tied his sandals. I don't know. but they knew what region he was from. And it says he began to call down curses. Now let's remember that Peter was a sailor. Okay? Let's remember that. And I'm pretty sure that he was cursing a blue streak. And he swore up and down, I do not know this man you are talking about. I do not know him. And immediately the rooster crowed, and Peter remembered what Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and he wept. He broke down and he wept because Peter was having a realization. Peter was having a realization that Jesus was not just trying to get a rise out of him earlier, but that Jesus was trying to warn him. That Jesus was trying to tell him, Peter, I love you, man. You do not have it. I love you, but you are not going to do this thing that you think you're going to do. You are not strong enough. You are going to fall away. Not only are you going to run, but you're going to betray me. You're going to deny me, Peter. You're going to deny me 3 times. And when I think about this, I think about Jesus betrayed and alone and standing before the Sanhedrin and going through this trial and going through the torture that he would endure and being nailed to a cross alone. It's easy to go through hard times when you've got people around you. I mean, hard times are still hard, but it's easier to go through hard things when you've got people surrounding you. Jesus was alone. He was so very alone. He was so alone, but by the time he got to the cross, he felt like God himself had betrayed him. Jesus was alone. And I think about these disciples. I think about Judas who betrayed Jesus and how quickly he was alone. How quickly he regretted what he had done. I think about these disciples that ran away and hid, locked themselves in a room. I think about Peter who ran away, but then had to stay close enough to know what was going on and how he denied Jesus and how in that moment he was so alone. The betrayed and the betrayers, all alone. Let's not forget that every one of them fled. Let's not forget that they all betrayed Jesus. They all abandoned him. That Peter denied him 3 times with curses and oaths. And you know, just like Thomas, we've talked about Thomas before. We'll talk about him again after Easter. Thomas gets that bad rap. What do we call him? Faithful Thomas. Doubting Thomas, but not anyone. Not one person believed without seeing Jesus in the flesh. Not one of them. We look at Judas and we go, oh, Judas was the bad one. He betrayed Jesus. But he wasn't alone, was he? He may have been the one who led the crowd to Jesus. He may have been the one who got the paycheck. But all of them betrayed Jesus. All of them ran. All of them fled. Judas gets marked as the betrayer, but let's think about this for a minute. What's the difference between Peter and Judas? The only difference between Peter and Judas is a paycheck and time. Judas got paid for his betrayal. Peter just saved his own neck. And time. Judas took an exit. He had an exit strategy. Peter hung around. Peter hung around long enough to be forgiven at that breakfast by the lake where Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? I wonder what would have happened if Judas would have just stuck around. Do we think that God's grace is not big enough for Judas? We don't like to think about that because we want Judas to be the bad guy. There has to be a bad guy. He's got to take the fall. But in God's kingdom, there is no bad guy. In God's kingdom, there is no bad guy who has to take the fall for our own guilt because Jesus took it on himself. We don't have to point the finger and say, he's worse than me, because Jesus took it all. He took it all, and he died the most gruesome capital punishment death that we can imagine. Hanging on a cross, feeling your lungs fill up with fluid, not being able to breathe, and all of the things that are portrayed in the written text. Jesus took it all. He took enough for Peter, and he took enough for Judas, and he took enough for every one of us. For those moments when we've been the betrayer and now we're alone, guess what? We're not. We're not alone. We're never alone. We're never alone. We're never alone. And God's grace is never going to run out for you and for me and the person down the street. God's grace is always sufficient. It was sufficient for a man named Saul who persecuted Christians and hunted them down and put them in prison. It's enough. And it's enough for you and for me. Jesus promised his disciples, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will be with you until the very end of all things. I will be with you. He's given us his Holy Spirit to live inside of us, to remind us in those moments when we are feeling so alone, whether we've been betrayed or whether we are the betrayer. We're not alone. There's grace for us. There's healing for us. There's mercy for us. And there will be a tomorrow where we will have the ability to recognize resurrection power in our own lives. Jesus says, you'll betray me, but guess what? When I raise from the dead, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. He tells them that night, same breath, you're going to betray me, but don't worry. I'll be on the other side. I will see you on the other side of that. I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Whatever we're facing, whatever dark night we're facing, whatever betrayal we're facing, whatever sense of loneliness, you and I have got to hang on to the hope of resurrection. We've got to hang on to the hope of resurrection, that this thing that we feel is so dead is not dead. Or if it is, that we know the one who has the power to raise the dead. You're not alone. You're not empty-handed. Your spirit may be willing, your flesh may be weak, but guess what? There is grace. There is grace. And just as those disciples could not drive out that demon on their own, they needed prayer. Guess what? You and I, we may not be able to do everything on our own. We will not ever get to that place where we have arrived and we no longer need Jesus. It's just not going to happen. We're never going to be at that place where we've arrived and we don't have to pray about it anymore. We need the power of God in our lives, and it's freely available. My hope is that as we read these scriptures, as we think this week about the things that Jesus walked through, as we prepare to celebrate the resurrection next Sunday, that we will remember that resurrection was not just a one-time thing. Jesus rose from the dead. Yes, that was a one-time historical event. But resurrection power, Paul says, is at work in your life and at work in mine. It is at work today. Today can be your resurrection day. Whatever you think is beyond hope, let's hand it over to God so that today can be our resurrection day.